The rental van's transmission whined like a dying coyote as it crawled up the switchback road to Schloss Greif. From her seat, wedged between foam latex creature suits and reels of imitation cobwebs, Eveline Krauss wondered if the scream came from the engine or from the overworked crew crammed inside. The Bavarian castle appeared through the windshield, a morose wedge of stone perched above fir-lined cliffs, looking every bit as gloomy as a place called Vulture Keep ought to look. "Perfect for our swamp demon," the director announced, leaning forward so his fedora bumped the windshield. "This ruin has production value oozing out of the mortar." Eveline admired his optimism. Production value was a treacherous phrase on a film whose budget couldn't cater breakfast and pay royalties in the same week. For her, the castle was merely the final stop on a 7-week, 7-country scramble to create scares no one would suspect cost less than a used sedan. They unloaded gear into the courtyard. Eveline's domain, a dented fog machine nicknamed Belcher, plus crates of flavored glycerine and a satchel of CO-even cartridges, looked puny beside the sound mixer's forest of cables or the cinematographer's beloved Steadicam. Still, the script depended on swamp mists seeping through every room, even though the nearest swamp was 200 kilometers away. Fog, Eveline liked to say, could hide 50 sins. Bad paint jobs on set walls, seams in monster suits, and, occasionally, an actor's uncertain performance. She doubted it would need to hide quite so many sins on this shoot, but she came prepared anyway. Schloss Greif's caretaker met them in the courtyard. Herr Baumann was short, stiff, and severe, as though carved from the same granite that jutted beneath the castle's foundations. He listed rules in dry German. No open flames, no drilling, no nails in the masonry, and absolutely no removing historical artifacts. The director nodded at each prohibition, while simultaneously plotting how to skirt them. Eveline, who actually respected old buildings, paid attention. The ban on open flames mattered because fog machines, especially Belcher, relied on a heating element that often smoked like an overworked locomotive. After the caretaker departed, the assistant director assigned sleeping quarters. Eveline drew the chapel gallery, a balcony over the derelict chapel, where echoed prayers had long since surrendered to bats. She stashed her duffel there, inhaling the castle's unique perfume, cold stone, mildew, and the papery smell of centuries-old hymnals. They lost daylight to set up. At dusk, the director insisted on rehearsing the swamp demon's first emergence, a dramatic sweep through fog so thick it strangles the moonlight. Eveline hauled Belcher into the corridor outside the chapel. She filled its tank with eucalyptus-scented fluid, her favorite because it lingered in air currents and doubled as a decongestant. The machine gurgled to life, coughing out a test plume that slithered along the flagstones. Perfect. When the crew rolled camera, Eveline unleashed the full dose. A white river spilled down the spiral staircase, curling around sconces like ghost fingers. The demon, really, a Bulgarian contortionist sewn into moss-green latex, emerged, shrieked, and vanished across camera frame. The director crowed. The cinematographer high-fived her, but Eveline was frowning. Beneath eucalyptus, she smelled something else. Acrid, sharp, almost metallic. Belcher sometimes produced a burnt wire odor if its coil overheated, yet this was different, faintly familiar from her childhood shooting black powder rifles at a summer biathlon camp in Garmisch. Gunpowder. She sniffed again. Nothing but eucalyptus. Must have imagined it. They wrapped for the night. The corridor's stones clung to the fog's chill, beading moisture on the walls like cold sweat. Eveline powered Belcher down, noting its coil temperature on her log. The smell, that prickle of sulfur and saltpeter, had vanished. She chalked it up to fatigue and followed battery-powered lanterns to the dining hall, where the caterer served grey stew disguised by heroic amounts of cream. The cast traded ghost stories until jet lag bludgeoned them into silence. Hours later, insomnia dragged Eveline from her cot. The chapel lay ghost still. She climbed over cables and descended the staircase to retrieve her phone charger she'd left at Belcher's station. Halfway, she paused. The air tingled with that same gun-range tang, only stronger. Belcher was off, unplugged and cooling, so the smell could not be electrical. She crouched, running a finger along the mortar. Sooty residue blackened her skin. Under phone light, the smear glittered grey. Black powder leaves charcoal flakes, she recalled. Smokeless modern powder is cleaner. This looked old. Too old to be recent vandal. The corridor had been shrouded in some form of dust or soot earlier, but Belcher's fog kept it invisible. Now, without fog, the residue ghosted every groove, subtle as pencil shading. Had she overlaid synthetic fog on top of powder haze and never noticed? To test, she licked a speck, unwise, perhaps, but her palate recognized the bitter tang of potassium nitrate. The taste transported her to crackling targets and puffs of white smoke rising from antique rifles. Eveline jammed the phone back into her pocket and hurried toward the crew dorm. She found the gaffer, Ludo, still awake, soldering a flicker controller. "Got any alcohol?" she asked. He lifted a flask. "For drinking or cleaning?" "Cleaning." He pointed to a bottle of isopropyl. She poured a splash onto a tissue, dabbed her sooty fingertip and watched deep brown swirls dissolve. Classic residue of centuries-old charcoal powder, combined with iron oxide from a barrel muzzle. Modern powder gave a greenish tinge thanks to stabilizers. She knew because her father restored vintage firearms. "Where'd you get that grime?" Ludo asked. "Corridor by the chapel. Could be fireworks residue from a tourist group, but it looks antique." He laughed. "Everything here looks antique." "Not like this," she explained her suspicions. Ludo's grin widened. "You think the place still reeks of musket fire after 200 years? Come on, Eve. That's romantic nonsense. Smell it yourself." But Ludo had actor-sized ego and technician hours. He wasn't leaving his soldering iron. Eveline pocketed the tissue and returned to the corridor. What musket could have discharged here, inside a fortified castle, and left residues undisturbed for centuries? Unless the wall was sealed soon after, entombing smoke. She ran palms along the masonry. Where the corridor met the chapel's north wall, the stonework looked newer, smoother joints. Paler limestone blocks maybe replaced during 19th century renovations. She tapped them. Hollow. A sealed alcove? A thrill shivered her skin. Hidden rooms were the stuff of melodramatic legend. But she'd once helped her father dismantle a farmhouse wall to discover a Depasvier, Mauser, and propaganda leaflets. Secrets survived in walls. Eveline pressed her ear. Nothing. But when she rapped again, a sprinkle of dust floated from the joints. It carried the same sulphur tang. Time to wake people who wielded heavier tools than a fog machine. She fetched the key grip, Petra, who never minded midnight adventures. Together, they examined the wall. Petra, after 30 seconds of tapping, whistled. "Someone bricked this up with soft mortar." "We could carve it out with a screwdriver. Been meaning to practice my masonry crime skills." "Herr Baumann will kill us," Petra shrugged. "Only if he finds out before the director sanctifies it as narrative necessity." Eveline giggled despite nerves. She fetched a multi-tool. Petra pried at the mortar, which crumbled like stale gingerbread. Within minutes they loosened a stone the size of a bread loaf. Cold, stale air exhaled through the gap. Air that carried concentrated musk of ancient powder and something fusty like rotted canvas. Phone flashlights pierced the hole. Inside, a cavity 6 feet tall yawned. A shape leaned against rear stone. Wood, iron, and faintly silver. "A musket," Eveline whispered. They widened the opening, removing 2 more blocks. Petra slipped inside and handed out treasures. A flintlock musket, tarnished but intact, a leather cartridge pouch, a tricorn hat squashed flat, and finally, a small cedar box. Eveline's heart hammered louder than Petra's chiseling. The musket's lock plate bore a crest falcon clutching lightning bolts. She recognized the crest from local guides. The personal arms of Barons Adalbert von Grief, executed in 1764 for treasonous acts during the War of the Austrian Succession. Legend said the Baron had plotted against both Austria and Bavaria, playing sides until one captured him. Supposedly he died on the ramparts, shot by his own guards for trying to escape. The Baron's private arsenal was confiscated or lost, depending which storyteller you believed. Could this be one of his weapons, hidden by a servant after betrayal? The fresh-looking mortar suggested a hasty cover-up. Waking up, Petra and Eveline crouched by lantern light, studying the contents like tomb robbers. The cedar box held cloth-wrapped objects, 5 spherical musket balls and a folded document. The ink bled from humidity, but remained legible under close inspection. It was a map sketched on parchment. The castle's ground floor, with X's marking rooms. At the bottom, Die Wahrheit schlagt back, the truth strikes back, Petra muttered. Either a treasure map or the Baron's weird revenge manifesto. Eveline traced the lines, one X aligned precisely with the corridor where they sat, another with the chapel nave, and a third with the courtyard well. Musket positions? A defensive plan for a last stand? A sudden voice froze them. "What are you doing?" Belcher's spare fog fluid jugs formed silhouettes behind Herr Baumann, lantern flooding his narrow face with suspicion. The caretaker glared at the hollow wall, the artifacts, then at Eveline. "Explaining will be complicated," Petra murmured. Baumann stepped forward. "You violated my most important rule. Do you know the penalty for removing artifacts from a protected monument?" Eveline managed. "Technically, we removed a wall to access them, not removed them from premises." Baumann's brow furrowed as though weighing which infraction was worse. He seized the musket, sniffed the barrel, and his expression softened unexpectedly. "Black powder," he whispered. "So, the rumor is true." "What rumor?" Eveline asked. The caretaker considered, then sighed. "My great-grandmother was a maid here. She heard that von Greif hid 2 loaded muskets in the walls, intending to rise from captivity and shoot his traitors. His plan failed, but servants feared the guns, still charged, might ignite, so they sealed them. Historians dismissed it. Now you prove her memory." Eveline glanced at the musket. The powder was likely inert, but no one should test the theory. "We should call authorities, heritage conservators, maybe the Landeskriminalamt." Baumann's eyes glinted with something greedier than pride. "And let them confiscate. The castle's trust will never see a cent from their archive vaults. But collectors pay fortunes for artifacts with bloody legends." He closed the breach with practiced familiarity. "I have buyers." Petra whispered, "He's gone full black market villain." Baumann levelled the musket, not at them but near, as if asserting potential rather than intent. The flintlock could hardly function after 250 years, but Eveline didn't fancy gambling. "You'll hand me the map," Baumann demanded. "Then patch the wall. You breathe a word, your permit to film here dissolves, and I claim damages." Fear clamped Eveline's throat, fear for the crew's jobs, for the fragile production, for herself. She saw Petra weighing options. A standoff with a caretaker brandishing an antique wasn't in her contract. "All right," Eveline said, holding out the parchment. "Let me photograph it first. The crew needs continuity shots of castle features. This could be a fun Easter egg. No names, no details." Baumann hesitated. She could see the greed warring with caution. A photograph couldn't reduce the artifact's cash value. He nodded. Eveline raised her phone, framing Baumann beside the wall, and pressed record instead of capture. "Flash is misfiring," she lied. She tapped again, turning on video light. The phone now streamed audio and video to cloud storage via her German SIM precaution she'd used to back up dailies. Insurance. She lowered the phone. "Got it. Petra, hand him the map." Petra's glare said traitor, But she passed it over. Baumann slid the musket into a burlap bag he'd carried, sealed the map in plastic and exited, ordering them to rebuild the wall before dawn. When he vanished, Petra exhaled. That escalated. Eveline shook. We can't let him traffic that gun. Not just because it's illegal. He's waving a loaded museum piece around. Plus, Petra added, there's a second musket out there. Maybe still charged, maybe unstable, Denny. And our fog machine is pumping glycerin vapor through rooms that might hide 18th century firearms primed to spark if a visitor flicks a light switch. Petra paled. We need help. They woke the director, who at first thought the tale a publicity stunt, but when shown soot samples, he sobered. We shut down until authorities secure the castle. Safety first. Yet Baumann controlled the keys, phones, and gates. While the director dialed local police, the caretaker cut power, plunging the courtyard into blackout. From the gallery window, Eveline saw a lantern bobbing toward the courtyard well, the X on the parchment. Baumann intended to retrieve the second musket before the cops arrived. Instinct propelled her. She grabbed Belcher's hose extension, a 5-meter PVC whip, and a pouch of cold spark pyrotechnics she'd meant for the demon's lair. Petra snatched the spare battery lanterns. They hurried through hidden service stairs until they reached the courtyard. Fog still drifted. Belcher had run earlier for an establishing shot. Under the half-moon, vapor formed ragged pillows across cobblestones. Visibility, bad for accuracy, good for stealth. Baumann hauled a rope bucket from the well. Metal clanged below. Eveline guessed the second musket lay in a cistern niche, preserved by mineral water. He struggled to swing something heavy onto the rim. She stepped into the square, raising her voice. Herr Baumann, stop! The guns might fire if mishandled. He turned, holding a rust-coated musket dripping water. You were supposed to stay inside. Put it down. Instead, he aimed it. It's worthless if police take it. Step away, or... Light flashed. Petra had flicked on the lantern behind Eveline, creating a backlit silhouette. Monstrous because she'd donned part of the demon suit, extended claws and webbed cowl. Fog eddied, transforming her into the film's creature. Baumann flinched, finger tensing on the trigger. Eveline acted. She hurled the cold spark pouch at his feet. Impact ignited magnesium flecks. Brilliant shower of silver sparks. No heat. Baumann yelled, stumbling. Instinctively, he squeezed the flintlock. The ancient mechanism spat sparks, but no discharge, powder damp. Still. Eveline dove as small flaming bits bounced toward the well's rope. Petra charged, claws raised. Baumann backed, foot slipping on wet stone, and toppled into the fog. The musket clanged. Eveline scrambled up, pinned his wrist with Belcher's hose, and Petra sat on his chest. Seconds later, the director arrived with half the crew wielding boom poles like pikes. Police sirens wailed up the valley road. Baumann lay pinned, blinking at the sparks' dying glow. His greed, not the muskets, had nearly killed them. Eveline's pulse hammered. She inhaled deep. Fog, eucalyptus, and gunpowder yet again, only this time unmistakably real from the musket's priming pan. Police took Baumann, weapons, and map into custody. Heritage officers sealed off corridors. The production was suspended, but the director struck a deal. They'd remain as documentary crew for the excavation, in exchange for later resuming their monster flick. Publicity, he said, would be worth diamonds. Weeks passed as archaeologists uncovered cache after cache. Swords, ledgers, and the Baron's last letters. Each day cameras rolled, capturing genuine revelations, more thrilling than the swamp demon's latex howl. Eveline's fog machine retired, moot in face of real historical haze. On the final day, Chief Conservator Dr. Vogel invited Eveline to lab. She presented a cleaned lock plate from the first musket, etched with the falcon crest, its steel now oiled and gleaming. We X-rayed the barrel, Vogel said. Charge was reduced, not full combat load, likely intended to wound, not kill. Perhaps a desperate warning shot. Fascinating. She handed Evaline the lab report. Evaline thought of the smell that first night, the residue Belcher unknowingly masked, and how fog had both hidden and revealed the past. Funny, she said. I created fake mist to hide flaws, and it covered up real clues instead. Maybe special effects can't compete with genuine history. Maybe it took your trained nose to notice anything unusual at all. Outside, the crew readied to shoot pickups for a new prologue, an 18th century betrayal leading to a modern haunting. The director swore the story had found its soul. Eveline walked the corridor where it began. Scaffolding supported the once-sealed wall. Fresh mortar framed the cavity, but a transparent panel allowed visitors to see where flint and powder lay for centuries. She touched the plexiglass, appreciating the symbiosis of illusion and truth. Petra strolled up, waving script revisions. You're now credited as historical consultant. Eveline laughed. Does it come with a raise? Hazard pay at least. But there's one note. The demon's entrance loses punch, since audiences know the castle's real history now. We need bigger fog. Eveline patted Belger, newly cleaned and tuned. Bigger fog I can do, just no more gunpowder surprises. Yet, as she primed the machine, she couldn't resist one experimental whiff. All eucalyptus, no sulphur. Perfect. She flicked the switch, and white clouds billowed down the corridor, curling through sunlight like the breath of time itself, ready to veil old wounds and reveal new wonders, depending on who listened to the air.